Okay. I'm coming in.
Okay, everybody, thank you for being patient for us to get started, waiting for a couple last-minute folks to join us. My name is Jacelyn Biondo. I'm the programming coordinator of the Pennsylvania chapter of the American Dance Therapy Association. I'm super excited you're all here. I'm really happy to introduce our panel today. We have Rachael Socha, who is a dance therapist.
Drama therapist.
It's okay.
But everyone else is. So
We have Amy Hunter, dance therapist, and Margrethe Melsom, dance therapist, and Elizabeth McNamara, dance therapist. So what we're going to do today is we're going to hold questions. We're going to have each of our presenters, they've got about 20 minutes each to share a little bit about their work. We're going to start with a brief introduction for you with regards to trauma-informed treatment. And then we may do a little moderation at the end, and we'll open it up for questions and answers. And we're going to remind you all that immediately following, we're going to have a little bit of a networking event. If you'd like to stay, get to know some of the DMTs that are practicing right now, some of the students that are going to be practicing within a year or two. I also want to remind you that this is a trauma-informed panel, which means that there may be some things coming up for you with regards to your own situations and your own clientele that you're working with. So just be mindful to not be too open and absorbing of things that you might not be able to hold right now. Be mindful of what you can receive and what you can't receive, how you need to take care of your bodies and your minds through this workshop together. Excuse yourself if you need to, by all means. Rejoin us when you'd like to. If we could just start for a moment together, whether you're sitting down on the floor or in a chair, if you can just ground your feet down into the ground for a moment. And then just feel your sits bones connecting down into either the floor or the chair. And then just feel the space between your ribs into your heart. And just notice the space there, how open or how closed that is, and know that you have access to open or shut that as you need to throughout today. Take a nice deep breath with Dawn. And so just take what you need for this time that we're going to be spending together. Like I said, we're going to take questions at the end, so please hold questions and hang on to them. And if you came in late and need to check in with me afterwards, please feel free to do that. If you're here for board certified DMT credits or RDMT continuing ed credits, you'll just need to fill out an evaluation afterwards. So enjoy.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Elizabeth, and I'm going to just start this morning by giving, louder? Okay. Movement, we're louder. Yes, please, if you can't hear me, let me know. So I'm going to start with just a very brief few-minute introduction of trauma, so we want to spend the most time hearing about our environment-specific and setting-specific examples and information. But just so that we're kind of starting from the same space in terms of our understanding of what trauma is and what trauma-informed care means. So for our, starting out together, I am going to depend a little on notes. I have my students that are here know that I get very excited about examples and going on, and then it will be the 50 minutes is up. So I will depend on my notes to keep me organized. So we're going to use, for today's purposes, we're going to use a basic operational definition of trauma to include a person's response to an overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds one's ability to cope. And or to integrate the emotions that are related to that experience. And that could be a single exposure to an event, right? Or that could be a prolonged exposure to an environment or a situation. When we think about trauma-informed care, we're talking about a framework and an approach that includes a way of thinking and includes our interventions that are grounded in an understanding of the profound impact that trauma has on a person's life. And when we talk about a profound impact, that could be neurological, biological, psychological, social, emotional, one, some, all of those impacted, right? A trauma-informed approach also comes from a place of accepting, seeing, and treating the person as a whole. And that includes the experiences that they have gone through and that their body holds, right? And so we talk a lot in trauma-informed care about trauma not being what's wrong with a person, but what's happened to a person. And that really informs kind of the approach and the place that we're starting with someone, right? And so in another environment where it might be very kind of symptom-oriented, and it's very much about what's wrong with this person, treat the symptom, let's decrease the symptom, and success means that the symptom has gone away or been resolved, right? That's looking at a very particular piece, and that's less holistic than kind of the zoom out. What's happened to this person? How has this impacted the many facets of their existence in their life and the relationships in the world, right? I think with that, that's enough of my background, yeah? Oh, the systems piece. So in terms of trauma-informed care, when it comes to the environments that you're going to hear and settings that you're going to hear us talk about, we're not talking specifically about interventions, right? It includes interventions, but we're also talking about an overall approach to care. And so you might hear some things, Amy's going to talk about school, and Margret's going to talk about inpatient, I'm going to talk about outpatient, Rachael's going to talk about a community health perspective. And so you're going to hear some crossover of things that are the same throughout all of those environments. And that's because the trauma-informed approach, right, means that the system that we're working in is trauma-informed, not just the intervention that we use in the treatment room with the patient, right? And so that can look a lot of ways. Some agencies and centers and hospitals adopt a system, right, like the sanctuary model, where they say this is the model that we're using, and it's a trauma-informed model, and that means that these are the principles that will guide how we treat the patients here. Not just guiding the patient care, it's also how our organization will function from top down. And that means that everyone in that agency is trained in that particular model, right? That means from the folks that might be on the maintenance staff to the CEO, right? Everyone who works there is trained in this model, and it's how the staff interacts with one another, it's how the staff interacts with the patients, and it's how the patients are then treated when it comes to interventions. If there is, that means that it impacts decision making, when decisions are made on behalf of the organization, when job descriptions are written, when transitions are discussed, that it's all kind of happening from a trauma-informed place. How will this impact our organization and the clients we serve? And so it's a parallel process happening. Yes, it's how we treat the client, right? And it informs our intervention style. And it's how we operate, and we model this all the time, every day. It's how the operation runs here, not just what it looks like in the treatment room. And so a quick example that I will give, and I mentioned the sanctuary model. So 11th Street Community Health Center, that organization has adopted the sanctuary model, right? And so again, everyone there is trained in that, and they use that as a means of operating as a staff and as an organization. And so it's written into their mission statement. It's within their decision making, again from top down, and it informs how they train their staff, right? And of course, informs how they treat their clients. Family court is an example of a setting that has not adopted trauma-informed practices. And so, despite the fact that many of the families that show up to family court have experienced trauma, that has never been written into the way that the families are welcomed, organized while they're there, or treated while they're there. And so when you enter that building, families, regardless of their background, are put through a metal detector, patted down, asked to take off portions of their clothing if they're beeping too loud, called by a number or called by their last name very loudly, kind of like a cattle call. And so there's nothing about that from when I'm in that setting that feels trauma-informed, right? And in fact, we know that when an organization does not adopt trauma-informed practices, the clients are at a much higher likelihood to be re-traumatized, right? And so in a place like family court where the power differentials are present and active the whole time you're there, right? I can see in folks' reaction while they're in line and while they're waiting and while they're being patted down that does not feel good and certainly doesn't feel safe. And you're going to hear us talk about safety all the different environments we work in, and how that's a really crucial piece of the work that we do when it comes to trauma-informed care. So I just wanted to give you two visuals of examples of a place that has adopted a trauma-informed approach and stays committed to it in their training, and a place where they have not done that yet. Great, thank you.
So that family court example ties in really well to what I do. My name is Rachael, again, and I work at a program called the PALS program at the Camden County Women's Center in Camden. So PALS stands for Peace, a Learned Solution. Is anyone familiar with the PALS model in New Jersey? Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar, get ready because it is awesome. So it is a state-funded program by the Department of Family Services in New Jersey that is a domestic violence program for children ages 3 to 12 and their non-offending parent. So mostly moms. We do have some fathers in our program, some LGBTQ, non-binary folks as well. And the only requirement to be part of our program is that the child has to have witnessed domestic violence in some form. That can be as, I say minute, but it's not. We know in this trauma-informed model, nothing is minute. But the child could have just witnessed her family or his or her family fighting verbal abuse to some of our kids who have been physically and sexually abused themselves. So it's really run the gamut. And it's a free program for 6 months. We sometimes extend depending on the family's needs, and I'm going to talk about one family who was very much extended in our program for a long time. But they come twice a week for those 6 months, once for individual therapy and once for group therapy. And I forgot, I think, to mention the coolest part about this program, which is that it's a creative arts therapy program. The children have to receive creative arts or play therapy, but the majority of the programs throughout the state of New Jersey are all creative arts therapy, which is awesome. It's awesome. New Jersey has its, issues as far as licensing us, but they do value our work, and I think that's really, really cool. So I want to talk a little bit about drama therapy for those of you who aren't familiar. I'm going to give a brief overview. I've worked very closely with a lot of dance therapists, and one dance therapist that I used to run groups with at Green Tree, we used to joke that our groups look very similar. If we were to put our brains together and make a group for a similar population, they would look the same. Just our theories are a little bit different behind why we do what we do. So the two main theories that I really orient myself in when it comes to trauma is a theory of drama therapy called role theory. Has anyone heard of this before? My husband's here, he's a drama therapist. So role theory is a little problematic in some ways. It's very binary, and our community, my community, is doing a lot of work in kind of unraveling that a bit. But essentially what it says is that we all play hundreds of roles in our lives. Me and myself, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a professional. It can be something as fanciful as like I'm a fairy or a mover. Many different things. And where pathology lies, where people get stuck, is when we can't move fluidly from those roles. So a really good example is someone like an addict. You may always be an addict, but when you are in the throes of your addiction, that is all you are. That's all you're thinking about. It eclipses everything else. So that's, one portion. The other thing that is really important to me is something called aesthetic distance, which means that we use the artistry of theater, and that can be anything. For those of you, how many of you dance movement therapists have been in like a play, in your height, we know that theater can embody movement, it can embody art, it can embody music, it's all in there. So we use the aesthetics of our craft to help either distance a client from their trauma. If they're too flooded from it, we'll use a story, we'll use metaphor, we'll use movement, we'll use fluid sculptures to help take a step back. Or if they're too far back, we'll play with the distance and maybe ease them in a little bit more so they can talk about it in a more concrete way. this can come in the form of, using storytelling, using metaphor. It can also, we talk about distance and how close we're living the thing we're living in our bodies. So you might use something like puppetry for a client that's a little too under distance. It's far away, just on your hand. Or you'll use something like the sand tray, which is fully outside of your body, and tell stories through that. And the more under distance, you get masks, face paint to fully embodied, right? This is when you're living in whatever story you're telling a little bit more. So that's kind of how I orient myself with trauma. And when I'm working with kids or parents, I like to assess in the beginning, where are they? I usually start in the sand tray first as an assessment. I'll do like a storytelling activity where I'll have them, make a picture, choose the main character, tell me a story. And I can tell from there, are they gonna be embodied right away, or is that something we have to work up to eventually? So that's how I orient myself to this. I have notes too. I don't want to go off the rails. Okay, so I want to talk about a client of mine who is way, I think, under-distanced from her trauma. And I actually think she's using movement and embodiment to skirt around some of the issues at hand. And I'm working with her right now, so I'm processing this aloud as I'm talking to you guys, because I'm trying to figure out where to go next with her. So this is the client. It's her second time in the program. She lives with her grandmother. Her mother was the main abuser due to drug use, due to, whatever situation she's got into with multiple men. Not this child's father. This child's father has never actually been in her life, but this child was exposed to pretty gruesome violence she saw. She was never abused herself, but I would venture to say it's my belief that if a kid witnessed that kind of abuse, they're abused, right? But no one laid a hand on her. She was in our program about a year and a half ago, graduated, but I would say about 6 months ago, her mother came back into her life. She's living with her grandmother right now, but grandma has brought her daughter back into the fold. She, going to get treatment. She's needed a place to stay. And when mom came back into this little girl's life, her trauma symptoms came back. She became really defiant. Her eating became quite disordered. She was not sleeping at night. So grandma gave us a call and wanted to bring her back into the program. She actually started with one of our art therapy, my art therapy colleague, and she didn't want to do art. She wanted to play, like full-bodied. I'm up. I want to play. You're, the evil stepmother. I'm the princess. We're playing, which I actually find very rare, even in kids, want to just jump right in an embodied way. It's so what's vulnerable. Yes, it's so vulnerable when you're in an individual setting to play with a therapist, right? Talk about power dynamics. I'm an adult. She's a kid. We're mindful of all of that. So very rarely do I see kids just say like, "Yep, we're doing it." If it's not in the dollhouse, if it's not with some sort of figurine. And my colleague very quickly said, I don't think she's actually a art therapy kid. Like, we have you here. Like, let's switch. So I started seeing her, and her metaphor is not veiled at all, right? Everything is, you're the evil stepmother, and I'm the daughter, or you're the teacher and I'm the student, and with a very loving relation, they all started as very loving relationships, and then very quickly, all of a sudden, she's like, hold on, Miss Rachael, so you're actually evil. You've been evil this whole time. You're bad and you hate me. Why don't you try to kill me? And so this play, it's been 8 weeks now that this has been the play. And anytime I try my hardest to switch that play a little bit, like, let's shift the narrative. Let's talk about what's behind this? Why are all the grown-ups evil? She doesn't want anything to do with it. She just wants to play it out. So I'm thinking two things here. One is, well, she's just working through this very extensive trauma that she's had with adults. She doesn't feel like she can really trust any adults. And the one adult that she did feel like she could trust, her grandma, is brought her mother back into her life, and she feels very conflicted about that. So that's fine. Like, that's great. Let's play that out. Let's work through that. But I also want to help her move past that a little bit and help transform her and start focusing on who are the adults in her life that she does trust. Because I do know that there are people in her life that she does trust, that she does care about. And I think that when we're talking about a trauma-informed model and we're talking about the whole picture, we are focusing on the set of experiences that happened to this young girl, but we're also talking about where's the repair happening, and where are the people that she can go to when she needs to. She is safe now. And it's tricky. So just so you all know, my next step with her is actually pulling her back a little bit. I'm going to challenge her to not be so embodied. I keep offering the sand tray to her. She's not into it. I may bring out my puppets. I may actually have her make a mask and do some mask work with her, so she still has that embodied piece. But when you do mask work, it typically is a little less verbal, especially when you're doing a full face mask. So actually moving her more into the movement piece, so she can't get in the way with changing the narrative with her language. It has to kind of sit in her body. So that's how I work individually with clients. Every client is different, right? Every age is different. When I'm working with my 2- and 3-year-olds, I'm doing a lot more just social skills learning and body regulating, and just take a deep breath. Let's make a calm down jar. Let's talk about that. When I'm working with some of my older kids, we're really diving into their experiences, their lived experiences a little more if they feel comfortable talking about that. One thing I didn't say is that one of the 2 criteria of our program is that, number 1, the children have to, the abuser and the non-offending parent cannot be living together. They cannot be in relationship, and they also need to have been away from the abuser for at least 3 months. So we don't want people who are actively in crisis, because we know that dealing with that, making sure they have housing, making sure that there's a safety plan in place, most of that stuff is in place when they come to us. And the idea is that they're not being re-traumatized. But they are. These women are going back and forth to court. And as we spoke about, court is a very, very re-traumatizing experience. A lot of these children, the abusive parent has custody. They're going back and forth between the parent's house, and being, anything we're working on with the parents is just being completely unraveled when they go back to, their abusive parents. So we do the best we can within the system that we work in, but it's not perfect. And I think that none of these models are perfect, and you can live and work in a most trauma-informed place, but it's not perfect, especially because as clinicians, we're all being really mindful of our own vicarious trauma and not picking that up and not bringing that amongst the staff. Okay, let me switch gears a little bit and talk about family work. We also do group work, but these ladies, I think, are going to speak about some group work that they do, and family is a group as well. So what's really interesting about family work in this setting is that a family system, they come at they're distanced differently from the trauma. The kids may be flooded and the parent may be so far removed. And when you bring them together, you have to kind of find that common ground. And it's not just common ground on how they can talk about the trauma, but they're talking about a shared trauma. this isn't a group that all experienced something different, but maybe under the same theme. They experienced the same thing. We have our parents who are just riddled with guilt. Every single parent that I talk to feels so awful that they exposed their child to this. You have the children who are protecting their parent. They're scared. They're angry at their parent for having put them through this. There's a lot of complex dynamics that are going on in these family systems. So I want to talk about a family that I worked with for about 7 or 8 months. They were in the program before I started, and around the time I started working at PALS, they had graduated from individual therapy, but their trauma was so extensive that we kept them on for another round of treatment, but in family therapy. There are 2 main things that parents realize when they're in family therapy for this work. The first is that their kids saw a lot more than they realized. You know, every single parent says, they definitely heard us fighting, definitely, but like they were in the other room. Meanwhile, the kid's like, yeah, my dad choked my mom all the time, I saw it happen. What do you mean? Like, I know what happened. So there's that to kind of reckon with in a family session to get everyone on the same page. And number 2 is these parents often want these family sessions to be behavioral interventions. These kids are traumatized, they're acting out at home, they're acting out at school, so they think that this will be a good time for us to sit down, talk about their behavior, and get like a sticker chart going, which we do sometimes, but I mean, talk about trauma of, you know, one little kid in a room full of adults yelling at them, telling them to be better. That's not what this is about. So this particular family, mom was also in drug and alcohol treatment, which I love this woman. She has a very direct way of handling, you know, she's like, I'm going through the steps, I'm gonna confront my kids about, let me tell them everything that happened, all the sexual abuse, like this is great, we're gonna get everyone on the same page. And I had to be like, whoa, like, let's step back here. Your kids are 8 and 10. Like, let's not. And also amongst that, there was a son and a daughter, and the son showed a lot of abusive tendencies himself. He acted out towards his mother. He acted out towards his sister in a way, patterns that were unsettling. And so I was not planning on doing puppets with this family. A lot of times parents don't want to do puppets because it's very childish and they think like, well, this is stupid. But the kids found my puppets, and the younger daughter, she all of a sudden showed this power dynamic in the family. She had this like big, large, like monstery looking puppet, friendly monstery, kind of like a Muppety thing. And she just started to boss her mom and boss, you know, her brother around. And for whatever reason, they submitted, which was awesome because this little girl needed a chance to say her piece and say her voice, and she never felt brave enough to do it. Not only did she never feel brave enough, but she just didn't have the space in the family to do it. So we spent weeks with these puppets having family meetings, talking about, you know, what was going on in the house, and they created this whole narrative for themselves of this puppet family. And about 3 weeks in, this little girl said, you know what? This is our house, Miss Rachael. Like, we're talking about, you know, my brother stealing all of my snacks, and that really happened. I was like, yeah, it did, didn't it, right? But it took that distance, right? It took that artistry to be able to talk about what happened. They couldn't do it. They would just fight if they were saying, you know, talking about the actual situation at hand. And they were able to do really beautiful work around their shared trauma with these puppets. And every week I was surprised. I find that sometimes I have clients that like pick better interventions for themselves than I would have picked for them. You know, they graduated our program in March. They still are, you know, they have issues because this runs deep and this is a lifetime of work. So what I'll leave you all on is that what I tried to instill into this family and all of the families, the mothers, the children, is that therapy is not scary, especially the work that we do. I mean, it can be fun, it can be joyous, it can also be hard and taxing, but my biggest goal, we're only a 6-month program, and that sounds really long if you're in an acute setting, but it's not. We're only touching on the trauma at the very end. And my hope is that my clients will feel comfortable continuing to go into systems and get the help that they need moving forward. And, it's encouraging to see places moving towards a more trauma-informed model, because that's what these people need. Trauma and oppression go hand in hand, and my clients are some of the most oppressed, marginalized people that I've ever worked with, because of that cycle of abuse, because they can be kicked down and pushed down for so long. So being able to work from a place where we can lift them up and see them as a whole people, believe them, the amount of women that come in here, the amount of kids that come in here and say, no one ever believed me before, and you're hearing me and believing me. I mean, that's step one. I could do no therapy with them. I could sit in a room and stare at them for the rest of their 6 months, and they'll walk out feeling believed. And that's just work we all do, right? That's what we learn to do, is we learn to trust and believe our clients. So yeah, that's what I do. And if you're ever looking for jobs, health programs are always hiring. We're all over the state of New Jersey, and we hire creative arts therapists. So all you students out there, check it out. Your jobs are all.
I used to work with Rachael, so this is like a reunion, and I'm so happy that she's here. I'm happy to share this space with you. Hi everybody, I'm Amy. I work in a mastery charter school in West Philly with 7th grade through 12th graders, so like 12 years old to sometimes 21-year-olds. So I'm not with the itty bitties. I have worked with itty bitties before, but I'm not with itty bitties right now. And I just want to clarify that I'm going to be speaking specifically about trauma-informed care with children and adolescents in a school setting. That's where I've worked for about 15 years. That's where my expertise lies. It's also really weird to say the word expertise and I in the same sentence. I worked really hard with Jason not to be on this panel because I don't feel like an expert in any way.
And here she is.
I feel like this work is constantly learning and building and evolving and adapting and becoming more aware, and so I welcome challenges to what I share with you today. I welcome additions, I welcome suggestions and questions, and this can be a dialogue. I'm by no means an expert, and I'm learning as I go. So the two things I've really learned in working with children in a school setting is that trauma really impacts the brain and the body together, and that developmental movement patterns help. And I'm hoping I can talk fast enough that I can get through all the stuff I want to share with you and the ways that I've witnessed that happen. But I want to just start just with like basic research around this. I want to talk about adverse childhood experiences. Just to raise of hand, how many of you are familiar with ACEs? All right, so it's a lot of hands, so I'll be really brief then. So ACEs is a study that was done back in the mid-90s in Southern California, kind of a longitudinal study seeing how 12 basic trauma experiences impact individuals over the course of their life, specifically their health in their adulthood. Some examples of adverse childhood experiences would be abuse, domestic violence, drug and alcohol use in the home, being separated from parents, parents divorced, parents in jail, systemic racism, systemic bullying, living in an unsafe environment, in an unsafe neighborhood. That's a huge one. So all of these ACEs impact our health over the course of our lives. And there's an amazing website called ACEs Connection. That's what it's called? Yeah, acesconnection.com. And there's a listserv that you can get on. I get emails from them. I think it's either weekly or bi-weekly. And because 1995 was a really long time ago, it doesn't feel that long ago to me, but it was a long time ago. So a lot has happened in this research in that amount of time, and so you can get emails from them about new research that they've done. They've done this research in 32 more states since it was first done, and interventions that they're doing, and so that's a helpful resource to have. So ACEs impact the way that the brain is organized, specifically the way a child's brain is organized. So I don't have my picture of a brain here, like I have on the back of my door in my office. So I like to use my fist, and this is how I explain it to my children. The brain develops from the bottom up. The brainstem is first. That's about safety. It's about our automatic nervous system, our breath, our heartbeat. It's about feeling safe. Then we have our midbrain, and that's where movement comes in and sensory experiences, and that's where we start to feel and regulate and modulate. And then we have our limbic system. Sorry, this is a very simplified version of the brain as well. There's lots of other parts, but these are the parts I'm going to focus on. So then there's the limbic system, and that's where emotions come in, and relationships, and attachment, and sex. That's where that comes in. And then at the very top is our cortex, and that's the cognition piece, and decision making, and rationalization. So children that have experienced ACEs, many ACEs, and I'd say like 90% of the students that I work with have experienced 6 or more ACEs, and I think the study was anything between 1 and 3 are going to have some health consequences. They have neural pathways that have really gotten strong down here in the brainstem because they're constantly in survival mode. They're just constantly trying to feel safe. So their brainstem functioning is really strong. And as a result, the midbrain regulation is maybe not so strong. Emotional expression, relating to other people, that's hard for them. It's hard for them to trust. And then the cognition piece, where you learn, that's the part that's really hard for them. And what are they supposed to be doing in school? Learning. So when they're down here in their brainstem, it's really hard for them to learn. And that's where I think we come in. There's a child psychiatrist named Bruce Perry, an expert, I think, in childhood trauma, reportedly, and he developed something called the neurosequential model. And it's like, again, I don't have my picture with me, but it's like an upside down triangle. And it talks about regulation is the first thing at the very bottom, that children have to feel regulated. And then they can relate, and that's the second part. And then the last part is that then they can reason. So that's really an approach that I use with students that I work with. And then I try to educate other people that I work with in the school setting that they first have to feel regulated, and then they can relate with you, and then they can learn. So what does that look like from a dance movement therapy perspective? Sorry, I also have notes. Well, because the brain develops in this sequential way, the body also develops in the sequential way, right? We know that there's a developmental process to movement, and so that makes it, in my opinion, really easy to relate to children from a movement perspective. So I always start with a movement assessment, and that can be really lengthy and involved, looking at the body level, looking at the efforts that they use, the shaping, all the stuff. It could also just look as an in-the-moment observation of what's going on with them. I do a lot of observing while I'm working with students, prior to working with students, so I think a movement assessment is always an important place to start. I look at their strengths, I look at their limitations, I look at how they are interacting with other people, I look at their passions, their connections, and then I also, again, I'm constantly educating the other people that I work with, the other non-DMT people, about observing and assessing prior to jumping into something. And that's something I've done a lot of trainings on as well. So the big thing that we all know about is mirroring, and I feel like when I learned about mirroring, it was me standing in front of somebody and we're doing this stuff, and that's not what it is, right? That's not what it is. That's imitation, that's almost condescending. That's not how we make our students that are down here feel safe. So that's always where I start, and I've done a lot of trainings about what does mirroring look like and how do we create a sense of safety and validation and trust building by mirroring. And I think it's about attunement, and it's also about validating, and there's a non-judgmental component to it. So I'll give you, somebody had said to me one time that we're human beings, we're not human doings. So it's about being with one another and not necessarily about doing stuff with one another. And that's a huge component of the work that I do with these children, and something that I think that when you're trying to educate other people is helpful. So the things that I try to have people look at when they're joining a student that is having a traumatized reaction or is functioning from their brainstem is like, what's the spatial stuff going on? We know that space is the first developmental effort that we kind of learn in childhood. So spatial stuff, how close are you willing to get them? How close are they willing to get to you? Where are they standing? What are they doing? Looking at them on a body level, on their body consciousness, looking at kind of their nonverbal focus. Are they tapping a pencil? Can you join them in that rhythm? The brainstem is lots of rhythm stuff. Think about customer rhythms. The qualities of movement that they're using. Are they moving quickly? Are they moving slowly? Like, how can you join them in those things and not just do this with them, right? So I can give you an example of a student that I was called to. Sorry, I have written on here the examples of when to give them, and I don't see one, so this is the one I'm going to give them. So there's a student that I've worked with since he was in 8th grade. He's now in 11th grade. Severe attachment trauma in his history. He is a beautiful, creative human and shuts down a lot and puts his hood up and kind of goes into this world where he, his fight, flight, or freeze response is flee. Get me out of here. And there was one day that he eloped from class and was trying to elope out of the building, standing at the front doors of the building. 7 other staff members around him blocking the door, really trauma-informed. And they're like, all right, call Miss Hunter.
They're trying.
Call Miss Hunter, let's bring her in. And he's literally just like, has his hood up and he's just rocking at the front door. Let me out, I gotta get out, right? Intense brainstem trauma response, get me out of here. And all I did was come and stand with him. There was no verbalness, it was all nonverbal. I joined his rocking. I gave him, I think I was standing on the same plane as him, like I wasn't facing him, we were just facing the same direction, rocking. I encouraged other people to leave. We don't need 7 people here watching this young man have a trauma response. I think we were probably together for about 40 minutes at the front doorway, really just rocking together. Eventually he moved to a sitting position. I sat with him. I focused on his breathing and kind of matching his breathing and where he was breathing in his body. I tried to slow down some of that breathing. It was all about attunement, and it wasn't about this. And it wasn't about getting him to move from the door. It was about just being there with him and helping him feel safe and secure in his brainstem. So that's where I usually start. I know they always tell us that's where you're supposed to start, right? So the midbrain part is about regulation. Modulating, it's where the movement comes in, it's where the sensory stuff comes in, so that's where I really look at efforts and modulating between efforts, fast and slow, strong and light, direct and indirect, really using those coping strategies, right, so that they can regulate. So an example I have for that one, there's a student that, a little 7th grader, 12-year-old that I just started working with this school year, who I actually don't know a lot about his trauma history. I know that it's there, but I don't know a lot of his ACEs. But you can see them in his dysregulation throughout the building. Running into stuff, punching people, having just really intense reactions, and it's no different when he comes to my office. And my office at Mastery is about the size of the space right here. So I don't have a lot of space, but I have a lot of stuff in my room. So he'll come in, oh, can I blow up a balloon? Pop. Oh, can I play that drum? Sure. And I only have one mallet because one of the mallets has disappeared. Boom, 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 the mallet breaks. Oh no, it broke. So like clearly there's just not a regulation. And I've only been working with him since the beginning of the school year, but I've already seen an ability to regulate between, like, so I now have pencils that we use for the drum. And we work on pound, bang, 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 as fast as you can, and now can we do like a little oozy, slowy, indirecty, sustained something, and now let's do it fast again. And he gets excited about it. I have it's called a balloon ball. It's a balloon that's inside of this cloth bag, and we hit it back and forth and see how many times we can hit it back and forth. Count how many times we can hit it back and forth before it hits the floor. I think the first few weeks, maybe 7 times, because it's wham, boom, it's bouncing off of stuff. last week we got to 530. Thank you for that reaction. He was so proud. He collapsed in a chair in my office and was like, oh my God. And we have a little Post-it note with his initials and the number 530, and it's up on the wall. Yeah, so that's an example of midbrain regulation stuff and how movement it's all nonverbal, right? How am I on time, Dawn? Okay, good. So this is a little plug for Rena Kornblum's Disarming the Playground curriculum. It's all developmental. It's all primarily nonverbal. It all relates to this brain stuff and the regulate really reason. I highly recommend it. It's perfect for school settings. It's easy for teachers to adapt. It's great to send home to parents to use at home too. So that's a little plug for her. I also want to talk about using nonverbal passions. So this is another example of a student that I've worked with for maybe 3 years. And he is classified with autism. He's in 10th grade right now. And significant trauma history in foster care families most of his life. Last year he ran away from home for 3 weeks to go try to find his biological family, was missing. Really intense trauma history, and a beautiful mover and a beautiful creator. Like, he makes these amazing craft projects out of a stack of paper. He'll just come and bring you a functioning umbrella out of a stack of paper. So has these beautiful strengths, right? And this year he's chosen to no longer take medication, so he also kind of has some aggression and anger stuff that's coming in as well. And I've tried to do some of the regulating stuff with him, and he's just really resistant and perseverating on this video game that he loves. So finally I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna let him listen. I'm gonna hear about the video game. Let's hear about this Undertale game. And as he's talking for 20 minutes straight about this video game, I hear him talking about these souls or characters of the game that have very specific names: patience, kindness, justice, integrity. And I'm like, ooh, there's stuff here. So he, as a creator, he and I have started making these, they're called power cards, which is kind of, I'm sure there's a theorist behind it, but I don't know who the power card developer was. So he makes cards. On one side he's drawn these beautiful hearts. Each soul has a different color. And then I have a Polaroid camera, and I'm going to be taking a picture of him. We've come up with movements that correspond with each of the souls, and he helped me come up with the movements. For example, justice is this one. So I'm going to get a picture of him doing the justice, and it's going to be on the back side of the card, and he'll be able to carry these cards around with him. Kindness is the 4 B's from Rena Kornblum's work. One of them is like a breath. So this is, again, like finding their passions, so that, and maybe it relates a little bit to what Rachael was saying about like creating some distance from the trauma, and some regulation skills. I feel like there's more to that than I need to say, but that's that. So impulse control is another piece of, I think, the regulation component. I use a lot of mindfulness with students, and sense of time comes in for impulse control. So like counting to 3 before you do something. I have those like buddy bands that are like those big elastic bands. I have one that's good for just 2 people to use. So I'll put it around my waist, and then the student will put it around their waist, and we'll separate as far as we can and still stay grounded, and see if you can stay in that position as long as you can. And then on the count of 3, I'm going to let you just fly, and I have a bead bag that they can fall into. So again, it's about like building in that sustainment for impulse control. So time, the use of time is helpful, and sustainment for impulse control. So then we get up to the limbic system piece, and that's about emotional expression. And I think so much of emotional expression is about body consciousness and feeling like friendly with your body, so that when you feel stuff that is like, hey, there's something there, instead of saying, I don't want to deal with that, that's informing me. What is that? What is that about? And how can I embrace that and express that and make that healthy versus pretend like that doesn't exist. So when your heart starts pounding, maybe I'm feeling nervous. What can I do about that? Or when you start to feel that queasiness in your stomach, what's that about? So I don't think that this is rocket science. We all are kind of figuring out the different body alerts that we have. But the students I work with really need support figuring out what those alerts are. So that's something that we work on a lot. Just the awareness of when you have clenched fists. What is that about? What's the emotion that's about? There's a student that is in a group of mine that I just started working with individually as well as this year, and he doesn't verbally want to express his emotions, but clearly comes in with stuff to the group and has many ACEs in his history. And so we use, like, what are some nonverbal ways you can express yourself? You don't have to say it out loud. You know, I have from the $5 store a little emoji ball that we use that you can just pass the emoji ball and point to the face of what you're feeling. So there's been times he'll be like it's his turn to share how he's feeling. You want to use the emoji ball? You can use the emoji ball, or we'll just, you know, this is, what does he look like he's feeling right now? What does this look like for him? Uses gestures, we'll use rhythm or stomping to express how we're feeling. So in the interest of time, I'm just gonna, I guess these last few I'll just kind of speak on briefly. Self-compassion is something that I really work on with students as well. And that's, I think, a component of the limbic system that if you don't feel compassionate about yourself, it's hard to relate to other people. There's a lot of shame associated with trauma. So really working around the idea of your strengths and supporting that. A student that I have with reactive attachment disorder that I've worked with for 4 years, and he actually went to residential for a year and then came back. Was really big into comics and superheroes, and we'd embody the superhero and what are his strengths and what are his stuff. And I went to visit him at the residential while he was gone, and he created his own comic book. And he's like, Miss Hunter, this one's me. And it was this beautiful drawing of, you know, this boy in a cape, and he's like, and on the back it tells my story. And it's, you know, all the stuff he went through, and it said, and then he went to therapy and he found his power. I'm just like, oh my God. Yeah, so this idea of self-compassion and empowerment, that's a huge component of it too. And then I think the healthy attachments that we get in the group setting is, and with me in individual setting, is really, really important as well. And with the limbic functioning, that idea of trust and safety, synchrony, joining other people, having a shared focus and a shared intention, and reciprocity, you know, feeling like you can give to somebody and they can give back to you. And I feel like there's so many examples I could give of that in groups. There's a group a couple years ago during a testing period in the school, and there's so many, you know, these benchmark testings, so many testings that come up, and PSSA testing, and it's re-traumatizing, it's stressful, it's you know, it's down here in the brainstem, and there's a group maybe of 7 of us, and they all, you know, we all started doing the same rhythm of like the we will rock rhythm, and they just started going around, and first it was we will fail tests, and we will pass out, and we will, and then it became we will survive, we will help each other, and they're each taking turns and like chanting it together, and it was this idea of we can support each other and we can make it through this. So that's just, I'm out of time, but that's just one example of kind of how they support one another and through the movement as
well. It's so nice to hear about colleagues' work. I say it's very I really think we're so fortunate to be in this profession. I think it is such, we're so fortunate to be in this profession, I think, because I think, you know, the participants and the people that we meet and the human beings that we meet really are greatly benefiting from someone who sees their humanity and who is not afraid to kind of meet the person, the body, and the whole being, which I think our profession does. So I just will briefly speak to sort of how I came to my approach to dance therapy in a trauma compassion. Sort of a little bit of my experience, how I came to where I am today, and how I feel pretty solid in how I approach to work with participants. I work at Girard Medical Center, which is now the Be Well Center, Behavioral Wellness Center. It has shifted name. So, and then kind of where I came from when I first started dance movement therapy, to look at where trauma sort of has gone from a more implicit piece of therapy to it actually being more of an explicit sort of overall, like Beth was talking about how it is trauma informed within the system as well. So it's an easier environment to work in today, I think, but nonetheless. And then just, I want to speak about the importance of engaging participants. And so when we talk about people engaging in a process of change and healing, how do we engage, and the importance of engaging? And I focus on sort of engaging the body and movement and becoming comfortable engaging on that level. I work on engaging the participant with their peer so that there is a support system that they're working with, because that's proven to be very powerful when people are changing. And then I definitely work on engaging in the therapeutic alliance and the knowledge of the importance of that therapeutic alliance and how that actually is a very important predictor for outcome of in therapy. And it's demonstrated that the quicker you can create a therapeutic alliance within the first to second session, it actually is more likely that the person will have an outcome of change that they're looking for. And then I want to look at very specific, actually, sort of my approach, what a DMT session looks like in group. It might be kind of basics, but I still think that it is a way to demonstrate how I approach trauma, how I approach practicing regulation and different things sort of within the session sequence. I also going to look at how I create a holding space and the environment around to ensure safety and people being able to explore and practice change. Again, there are kind of basic tips, but I think it's helpful. There are things that are not always spoken of within our education system because they seem maybe so basic. So I'm going to address some of those. And then just looking at what it's like to work in a group and kind of do some of this work versus an individual. The way that I use myself as a therapist, to what extent I use myself. I always use myself a lot, I think, but it looks different in different contexts. And so how that impact of use of myself is actively used so that to mobilize the participants, but then how does it impact me also? What do I need to do afterwards or for self-care so that I am also taking care of myself in that process, giving. So I came to this work from having taught dance. I started teaching dance when I was 15, and I'm speaking to that because I think that it is important to remember the power of dance and movement and artistic expression. I was very lucky, I taught in a large school that had 1,000 students in it, so I would stand on these podiums and teach like 60 dancers at the same time, every day. So I would see the power of kind of moving everything from when people came in and kind of just stood in their own spaces, they didn't really talk, to having them engage more and more on the movement level, and to how that when you passed them, you walked across the floor, how much more social and uplifted and different they were in their bodies. And so I knew that power and as a dancer as well, of course, in my own life, but then kind of how I still tap into that always in sessions. And I think it is one of those things that my confidence in my ability to dance and move and dance with people is very important to use and remember when you work with people that are wounded and that have experienced, that are, I would say, scattered and kind of broken in their bodies in many ways as an avenue into engagement. And so I had cancer as a young adult, and that experience as well of living with a traumatic illness, really I used dance to heal, to express things that were impossible to find words for, and I listened to a lot of very loud music, very full music, to hold all those emotions that I had a hard time kind of figuring out people were too afraid to ask about. And so this is kind of where I came from coming in, which is why I came in to do dance movement therapy, because I knew the value of it. But I'm saying that to speak of like to remember to tap into those things that brought us to the work as well, to be authentic with it, because I think when we have the examples and the people that you speak with, you need to be authentic, because our participants are always looking to see if you're rejecting, if you're assessing, if you're judging. So just being you and being comfortable with you and being with is really, I think, a large part. And since we're dance therapists, that means the comfort of sort of being in our bodies when we move together with them. So coming to the Sanctuary program at Friends Hospital back in the day, we very explicitly actually worked with trauma. There were a whole unit with people that had experienced trauma that had dissociative identity disorder. And so the work that we did in dance therapy was full on, right in. And we danced and they expressed and they grounded, so they were able to kind of integrate more and more on the movement level. We had a whole program that had drama therapy, psychotrauma, art therapy, music therapy. They filmed themselves when they were experiencing different alters, all with the goal of kind of integrating the different alters within the host, the person that had all of these traumatic experiences. So I was so lucky because I feel like it was just an environment where you worked through the trauma in a safe way. You know, it's not like, oh, let's work on your trauma, but that was the goal of that particular program. So then coming into Gerard Medical Center, where it was very medical model and sort of a symptoms-oriented piece where you stabilized a person. Yet we in the creative arts always knew that we were addressing, you know, the underlying trauma and the whole person. So there was ways that we could do that, even if, let's say, CDH was looking at, are they less depressed, are they less psychotic, etc. So we can find ways of working within all systems, but of course it is easier when it is a trauma-informed system. And then kind of looking at how at Gerard, gradually the city had this implementation of a recovery-oriented model. So we worked with addictions and psychiatry, but there became this model understood that people are actually changing because they want to change. And people will change when they're ready to change and heal when they're ready to heal. And that we have to come in at it, you know, meeting people where they are and where their readiness is. And so the recovery model kind of, again, is person-centered and holistic, and, you know, the importance of instilling hope is very important. Empowerment of the person, the peer support, these are all principles that are very, very important. And trauma-informed care was also one of those essential elements of that approach. So we early on kind of began to see what it's like when a program shifts from telling a prescribed treatment, so Shaolin, you shall do these programs, you shall do these many steps, and then you need to go here, as opposed to a program that says, what do you guys need? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Oh, you're going in an outing? Okay, so that shift, I'm just thinking about, it was a kind of actually a traumatic shift for the staff, because they had a known role, it was predictable, they knew what they were going to implement and tell the participants, but then all of a sudden we're asking you, the person in treatment, what can we do for you and how can I walk the journey along with you? But I think that element was so important in terms of highlighting what the creative arts already knew to do, and dance movement therapy in specific. And then even more so, the paradigm shifted to kind of, okay, so the whole organization is not only recovery oriented, but it is actually also then implementing the trans-theoretical model, so that we're looking at stages of change and levels of change. That was also helpful to know that we're all on the same page, whether it's psychiatry, it's forensic, it's residential, drug and alcohol programs. So these things made it easier to kind of address trauma specifically, I think, because it was clear where everyone stood in each different program. Then, more recently, we have shifted again to actually not the sun but moon model per se, but the self program, which is an element of the approach that someone speaks to. So the whole organization is trauma informed, and all staff are learning about stages of change, and they're learning about the self curriculum. So this is a necessary environment to create stability, predictability, and safety for people to engage in their treatment. So the ways that we are asking people to engage in change is by coming forward. So I think that engaging the person in movement, engaging the person in speaking with their peers, and engaging in the therapeutic relationship is our strength. You know, we in dance movement therapy, we know how to set up mobility and flexibility in a ways that we meet every person. So Amy was talking about the importance of assessing. So when I come into a group, I look around the room. I may have seen them earlier in the day, but I certainly look around the room to see where they're at. And I would need to be able to start right where they are in order to engage in the movement program. However, one of the things that I find very important is that the therapist is clear. So I bring back some of my teacher in me, some of the dance teacher in me, and do a very specific warm-up. So part of the sessions actually have kind of like always 4 songs for warm-up. I use a very clear check-in first to say hello and kind of describe what dance movement therapy is. I set up the predictability of saying that dance movement therapy, you know, when we have experienced difficult things, is actually a wonderful way to heal, to be compassionate about our own selves, to heal our bodies. And so part of what you will be able to access is this element of expressing yourself, trying new ways of expressing yourself, practicing new ways of being, but within the body. And so I make the expectation very clear that they can actually come in here and do healing from trauma. I don't necessarily say you can work on your trauma, but I speak directly to the fact that when we move here and we move together, there is healing that can happen. And so that's sort of the setup that is very important. The 4 songs are a clear warm-up, so that there is a kind of self first, the awareness of self and the awareness of the body, very sequential body warm-up that's almost psychoeducational, almost like a little, you know, if you have all men that aren't really comfortable dancing, then it's important that you do some exercises and that you do some movements that aren't like too fancy, but at the same time I want to be inspirational, so I actually do some like extra lovely dance and some extra lovely movement to make them want to move, and like, okay, that's a large movement, I can at least do like a little something. So my presence is always kind of large. So that doesn't mean that I only do like large and lovely and happy and up movements when I have a group of all depressed people, but I do have to lift it. I do have to set a scene that is uplifting, so that, you know, it's a very strange example maybe, but if you go to the restroom in a store, you know, it's quiet and you're gonna have to go, it's very hard to do that. But if you come into a bathroom and there's music playing, it's much easier to actually engage. And so, you know, my son goes into the bathroom a lot in stores and all the places, so I know this, but I will tell you exactly why I'm saying it is because I use music that fills the room. But my movement fills the room. My presence fills the room. So that, therefore, it is a little bit less anxiety-provoking to put themselves out in space. So I have about 4 songs that kind of go from a warm-up and body awareness, my own kind of mobilization and activation, that then has rhythm and that gets into the cohesion and synchrony that Amy was talking about, so that I feel seen, I feel witnessed, there are some connections. You know, I know when to make eye contact and when not to be too direct, to allow people to come in their own. And then I begin to reach more into space, so that there's awareness of myself in relation to space. That then opens up for interactions and relations with others. And so they're basic things, but I always do the same sequence. And then I follow on with passing the leadership. So again, I will be the one who demonstrates first. I want them to make sure they can follow my movement movement clearly and organized first. I don't want people to jump in and maybe be crazy in the middle. It's lovely and I can pull them back, but you want to do this so that if one goes in the middle and moves a lot, then all of the people that have difficulty with regulation and that are traumatized will be in there, the others will be withdrawn, and it's very, very hard to engage in the process. And so that sort of practicing of passing the leadership makes them more and more comfortable with expressing with one another. And I do that session after session after session after session, specifically for people to have the opportunity to practice engaging with their body, engaging with peers, engaging in a different way of expressing themselves, so that they know next week, oh yeah, here she goes again, okay. So I have a little more mastery of it. You know, I go in from strength-based and kind of get them to mobilize, but they know what to predict. And the more and more they practice this sort of sequential beginning, middle, end, they also get to practice like starting and stopping. They get to practice beginnings and endings. They get to practice life and death. Like there are many, many things that you get to practice within those sessions. Emphasizing transitions so that again you get this sort of continuum of trying to regulate not just all on or off, but also the in-between. It's going to help them practice healing, practice change, whatever it is that they're there for or want to work with. Sometimes that goes into very creative, you know, spiraling and shaping and sagittal movement and beautiful kind of, even the group, all men, that are even using scarves and sort of going in these intimacy moment that you are creating relationships and little visitations that, you know, if you think about it again for trauma, often it is the relationship to one's body that's difficult, the relationship to others that are difficult. And so I'm the therapist creating sort of this opportunity for them to have a relationship with themselves, to practicing the relationship with peers, as well as practicing the relationship with me. And then, you know, I have a closing kind of piece of course, to work on regulation and kind of decomposing that part and meaning making for the integration. Some of the tips that I want to give is, I actually said with the music, is I use loud music, organized music, music that's uplifting, that has a lot of affect to it. And maybe this sounds like overwhelming when people are flooded, etc. So you have to use it with some good judgment as to, like, if this is a totally flooded group, then you would modify it a little bit. But I also sing to the song. If I love it, I sing it. You get the breath support with it. They get to sing. You know, so you want kind of easy ways in to mobilize the body so that they can engage the body. You can see a shift from the beginning to the end. At the end, they can go and reflect when I ask them, you know, what changed. They can see on a movement level what changed. What does that tell them about themselves? What are they discovering? Well, the fact that they were capable of change, even if it's small, or it could be a large change, it's hopeful. It's instilling hope. They're able to see that they can heal from very different experiences. You know, and then I think in the interest of time, I just want to say that the relationship piece is very important, and I've worked in the same organization for 20 years. Just yesterday I had someone run down the street and say, "And Margrethe!" And they were one of my patients or participants in 2001. Hi Margrethe, how are you? Are you still doing the music thing? Are you still doing the music therapy? Yes, I'm still doing the music therapy, which is dance therapy. and is your student still there? Do you remember the student? And I remember the student's name. Yes, she was a ballerina. I remember she said she was a ballerina. And you said, you're still a ballerina. So, like, you know, these important moments, he had relapsed and had come back into the program, and so it doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to heal everything and that you're able to help them repair everything that's been going on. But they do have a sense in these sessions that experiences that I move with others with and move with a therapist, there can be pleasure in it. You know, there could be joy in it. And I think that the more and more and more they experience that, if they experience it week after week after week, there's a little bit of realigning in the brain and realigning situations. You know, you can create a new narrative that if I'm intimate with someone because I'm dancing with them, I actually can begin to like that or like to enjoy it. And I think that again sort of, as long as you recall in the end to kind of do a conclusion and a discovery around it, you have to make the meaning that what this means for me is that actually I am capable of relatedness. I am capable of connecting, which I think is powerful.
Okay, pros and cons of going last. And I'm like, oh, but I wanted to do that. Okay, so yeah, exactly. I am going to talk specifically about a trauma-informed approach in private practice in an outpatient setting, obviously. And so what's in such contrast to what I'm hearing everybody share about is like they're encountering them either potentially in crisis, right? But in inpatient, where the safety and the immediate resourcing is built in, right? It's right there. Or in the school, even though the kids are in school and going home, right? But it's within a system, right? Or within a community program. And so the system provides some, is part of the resourcing and the support. And in contrast, in private practice, the person has come to me, right? So they have sought out treatment or support in a way that's quite different from the folks that we've heard about. And so there are pieces of this that as I'm listening, I was like nodding and saying, of course it looks the exact same in my office, even though it's so different. And there's pieces that are so different, right? And so I'm going to try and organize that as I talk about it. The way that I'm going to do that is by talking specifically about what would be considered the 6 guiding principles of trauma-informed care, and to name them out loud, they are safety, choice, collaboration, trustworthiness, which is sometimes also called transparency, empowerment, and cultural humility. And so these pieces were present in everything that we just heard, right? Either explicitly or implicitly, but we heard pieces of all of these things because they create the foundation of the work that we do. And so I'm going to talk about them specifically and what it looks like in an individual setting or individual session in a private practice setting. So what's interesting is that not everybody who comes to my office identifies themselves as a trauma survivor, and not everybody is, right? So I'm recognizing this is the work that I'm talking about does not apply to every single person I've ever worked with, right? It applies to some of the people that I've worked with. And people come in various phases of relationship to their experiences, right? And so I got a call last month and the voicemail said, I was assaulted 3 days ago. I need to be seen immediately. I can't sleep. I'm afraid to leave my house. I don't want to get in a car again. She was attacked as she was getting out of her car. And it was like an immediate, I need support. This thing just happened, right? And it's right there. She wants to talk through it, dive in. Let's figure this out, right? I met someone this week who identified that they are looking for support because they notice that they are anxious and they would just like to be a little more relaxed, but everything's mostly fine. And from the outside world, anybody who looks in would say that I have a lovely life, and I probably don't have anything really to be anxious about, but I still feel anxious, and so maybe I should my friend said I should talk to somebody about that, but everything is mostly fine. I worry about my kids so much that I have multiple nights where I don't sleep, but mostly I'm fine. And I have this amazing husband. He's wonderful. He's really hard work. He's a great provider. We hardly ever have sex. I'm not really sure why, but it's fine. And so, and we should probably meet soon because Thanksgiving's coming and my mother's coming. and I won't sleep at all in preparation for that visit or after she leaves. But mostly family is fine. And so I'm listening to her go, 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 and she does not report on the intake that she has a history of trauma. I offer an invitation to write what people would like to write and to leave things blank if we want to come back to it. She has chosen not to share. And I'm thinking and assessing and taking information in, and she doesn't want to move. We're not going to move in the first session. We don't need to move. Everything's mostly fine. And so, okay, so there's probably some information for me here around maybe some traumatic experiences or things that maybe it does not register as trauma for her, maybe. But we're going to probably come back to that, right? So it could look all different ways. I also have worked with folks for a long period of time because the presenting issue that they came in was A, and in our working through A, and that could just be, hey, I'd like to have a better relationship with my partner, I'd like to be a better parent, I'd like to perform differently at work, I'd like to, and then a history of trauma is disclosed within the work, right? But it's not what they came in to work on. And so the point of entry into the work, right, in terms of the trauma piece, can look at a lot of different ways. Because of that, I really try and have a trauma-informed approach with every client I encounter from the beginning, so that wherever they are in the relationship to trauma, if that is part of their experience, we've created a space that is optimal for them to work in, right? And so when we think about these 6 guiding principles of trauma-informed care, the first is safety, and you've heard my colleagues talk about safety in all different ways and what that looks like in various settings. In my office, that looks like physical safety and emotional safety, and sometimes safety is very particular. There's a code to get into my waiting room so that they know that no one else is going to be in the waiting room unless they're there to be seen, right? That's about physical safety. They know what my office looks like, and I don't make big changes to my office space, and so it's predictable. And when something changes, people notice, and they say, hey, that wasn't there last time I was here. Yeah, that's new. And so there's something even just about predictability of space that can help people to feel safe enough to do the work, right? There's also a piece about physical and emotional safety for a lot of the folks that I work with that is about being comfortable and giving themselves permission to be comfortable. Jason and I actually were at the conference, we were in the same workshop with Amber Elizabeth Gray, and we talked a lot about this idea of being comfortable, and she actually replaces the word safety with comfortable in her work, because safety is relative. And if you were abused by a caretaker, someone who is supposedly a safe person, your experience with and relationship to what safety is relative, right? And so I loved that work and the idea of replacing safety with comfort. And so I do ask my clients, like, what do you need to be comfortable in this space? And I try very hard to model that from the minute I walk in. I encourage people to come into my office, and I say, I'm going to go get my cup of tea and fill my water, and I'll be right in. I do it with regularity. It's predictable. They know that's my deal. I'm also modeling. I'm going to do what I need to do to make myself comfortable, and I encourage you to do the same, right? And so it's small things. It's my tea and my water and my shoes off most of the time, but it's giving them permission to do the same. A few weeks ago, a client, almost at the end of session, was like really squirming, and I was noticing that they were shifting around a lot, which is not typical for them. And so I just pointed that out and noticed it and just checked in about it. And she said that she had to go to the bathroom the entire time we were together. And so I encouraged her to go do that. And when she came back, we actually had this amazing discussion around the fact that she does that all of the time. That is that's directly impacted by her childhood trauma, where asking to go to the bathroom or any change in the plans with her very rigid and abusive mother would have been a 10. If you were in Target, you had to go to the bathroom, that ruined the trip, and you ruined everything, and why didn't you go before we left? And so the rigidity around that, she has learned to ignore her bodily sensations, right? And so even something as simple, not so simple for her, as encouraging people during sessions to do what they need to do, right? Pay attention to your body, listen to what your body says, and let's respond in a compassionate way, right? So that there's some very basic, what might seem basic, practices that I try to utilize in my space to ensure that people feel safe physically, that they feel safe emotionally, that they feel like I can handle them, I can hold them, I can see them. I'm not scared of their trauma, I'm not overwhelmed by their trauma. That is hugely important. If I had $1 for every time I've heard a person say, I've been told I'm a lot. I've been told I'm over this. I overreact. I'm oversensitive. And so take the over, take that language right out of how we work, right? So holding space, creating emotional safety, creating physical safety, predictability is a really important place to start. I know it's to stay on task. Oh, this could be as simple as like saying to someone, you're welcome to sit wherever you want in the, they have a love seat, a chair, we sometimes move that if we're moving, but I say, or on the floor if you want to grab extra pillows, or there's a throw, a blanket right there, if you need to be warm. And it is amazing to me how much prompting the folks who have had trauma in their backgrounds, thank you, how much prompting they need to actually advocate for themselves and say, yes, could you close the blinds, the sun is right in my eye, right? But the sitting and just withstanding the discomfort, or not even recognizing the discomfort, is really, impactful, right? So the thing, one of the things that really stands out about the folks that I work with too is that, bless you, is that the things that I'm doing in my office, that we're doing together, that we're practicing, that I'm modeling, that I'm encouraging, I always want there to be transfer outside of the space, right? And that might be a little different. That might be particular to this setting, different maybe than some of the things that we're talking about with other colleagues, right? Because they are literally going to leave my office in 50 minutes and head back out, right? To the train, to the bus, to the car, to the street, right? And so sometimes we'll do something and I'll say, what can this look like outside of here? Or someone will come in and say, I brought a candle to my office and it feels like it changes everything, right? It's like, oh right, you've made your space just a little bit more comfortable and you felt like you could have permission to do that. That's great, right? And so the transfer outside of the office feels very important. Okay, so transparency and trustworthiness. On a very basic level, I need to trust and believe my clients, and they need to trust me enough to do the work. I don't anticipate that they will trust me in the first session or in the first 5 minutes that we meet, but as Margrethe pointed out, the faster we can establish this therapeutic rapport and that they can feel seen and heard by me, the greater the outcome, right? The more likely they're going to be to return and engage in the work, right? So I've talked a little bit about how I do that, but that also can be in them feeling emotionally safe and physically safe in the space. But the transparency is also, and the trustworthiness is being reliable, being consistent, and having really good boundaries. And the boundaries have to be predictable and consistent and clear, right? The transparency is also doing the business part of the work that I do, and so making sure that we've looked at the paperwork together, and I say, you always have a choice about the work that we're doing, and this is what I expect from myself, and this is what I expect from you. What is this going to look like? And being transparent about that piece, right? The idea about choice. Choice in this setting, right? They are coming to me, and so part of that choice is obvious, right? We're not 302. They don't say, well, I'm in school, but I don't want to be in school, but I have to be here, right? So they've chosen already to be in the space and to do the work. But I don't take that for granted. That then once that's the first step. But there has to be choice in the work, and from a trauma-specific place, that choice is often around pacing of the work. That the timing is not my timing. The timing is the client's timing, right? There was a young guy that I worked with for many years who, the first time I met with him and his dad together, the dad said, as soon as the kid left the room, he said, I'd like to be optimistic about this, but we've been through about 1 million therapists, and he only usually will come for a few sessions, and so don't take it personally when we don't come back. Okay, that's a good start. And you know, he acts out, and he smokes a ton of weed, and he doesn't really talk to anybody, and he's like a super dark kid, and all he wants to do is journal and draw and smoke weed and play the drums, and I'm thinking like, okay, there's a lot to work with there. But he's always in trouble in school, and you know, he's an impossible kid. Okay. So I worked with him for years, and he didn't leave, and he kept coming back. And we did fabulous work. He had a very complicated physical medical background, and he had many surgeries as a young child, and had a kidney replacement, I guess like right before. He had one at birth, and then he had one right before we started working together. And so Dad kept saying, aren't you going to talk about the medical stuff? Like, talk about the medical stuff. This is a huge deal, right? He can't do the other things that kids his age can do, and it really impacts his life. And you guys aren't talking about the medical stuff. It's medical trauma. It's like, when he's ready to talk about the medical trauma, we'll talk about the medical trauma. And so it probably was 4 years, honestly, into our work, maybe 3. And we had referenced it. I always would check, oh, you have an appointment at CHOP, how did that go? And you know, we would check in about it, but he didn't talk about it. And there was a day, he had been at CHOP earlier that day, we had talked about it, I said, how was your appointment? We're making small talk. And he just stands up and he says, you want to see it? I said, see what? You want to see my son? I said, okay, right? And he just lifts up his shirt, and so if he was across from me, right, pardon my back for a moment, he just got really close, he came right up to me, right? And he said, do you want to put your hand on it? It feels really, really funky. I said, okay, right? And so I just outlined with my fingers, right, his scar. Well, it took 4 years, right? And was the dad disappointed that we didn't talk about medical trauma in the first 3 sessions? Probably. That's okay. That's not my client, right? And so the pacing and giving him choice, and probably the only reason he was willing to be that vulnerable is because in session 2, I didn't say, tell me about all these surgeries you've had. That must be tough, right? And so, right, let's move around that, right? And so it took forever, right? But we got there, right? He was actually willing. We actually made the outline of his scar, the outline of his scar, we actually ended up making, he drew it because he wanted it as like a tattoo later on, and we ended up making this dance in space that kind of became part of the way that we closed session in our work after that. But if I would have said, we're going to start by moving, we're going to get up and move. I mean, he was a severely depressed kid who didn't want to move, had a lot of shame about his body. He was never going to come back, right? So we have safety, we have trustworthiness and transparency, we have choice. We have collaboration. That one's kind of obvious, I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but the part about collaboration also has to be about leveling up the power differential, right, and really being with the person, and having them, again, you know, choice in the collaboration piece is tied tightly, but having them feel like we are working together, we're a team, this work is ours, right? And so we're going to decide together. It's not me prescribing treatment, right? It's us deciding together what this can look like, and I'm always giving choices. I'm never going to force anybody to move in my office, right? Oftentimes the movement just comes organically. There are some folks that I start when we do a warm-up and we move a lot of the time. There are some folks we don't move at all in some sessions, and they might say something, I say, oh my gosh, and this happened, and they describe it with a metaphor, and I say, let's pause for a second. What does that feel like in your body? Can we move that? And so that wasn't, you know, that just kind of emerges organically, and then we move that piece, and that's where the movement starts in the session. And if that's okay, if we've talked for 20 minutes, and the image comes at minute 21, and that's when we start doing the movement work, that's part of the collaboration, right? And so it's always an invitation, it's always an option, but I'm not going to say this is how we start, right? In another setting, that's so important to do that, right? The high structure. In the setting that I'm in, it's not going to work exactly like that. Empowerment. This is huge, right? This is where the skill building comes. This is where a strengths-based approach comes, and so you know, having it be strengths-based, having it be skill-based. I want people to learn how to be different in their bodies, right? So that when they leave my office, they can be different in the world, in their body, and also as they relate to people, because I want their relationships to shift, right? So many times people will come in and the relationships is where they're noticing the trauma coming up, right? You know, a lot of the folks that I'm working with are high achieving, successful, they have partners and children and jobs, and they're functioning really well out in the world. And so it might not be as obvious where the trauma is showing up as someone who's in crisis in an inpatient setting, right? Or where the acting out, you're seeing it in the classroom because they are flipping desks. 2 minutes. So it might be more subtle, right? But they might say, I can't connect with my partner in the way that I want to. When my child cries, I feel resentful and I feel annoyed, and I just can't soften enough in my body to be with my kid. And I feel angry at them all the time, right? And so sometimes the work is a little bit more nuanced in the relationship, like in the relational piece of it. And so I want them to have the ability, have access to be in their bodies differently so they can be with other people differently when they leave. Make sense? There's also this piece around empowerment that is around psychoeducation that is so important, right? For so many of the clients that I work with, they have just normalized their experiences. They have just done it this way because that's the way that they have done it, and they still have, you know, they are successful despite their trauma, and so they've normalized their responses in their body. And to say, well, it makes sense that you've not paid attention to your urges to go to the bathroom, and why, and like let's make sense of that and understand it, and let's learn about that in your body and shift it and give yourself a different choice about that, and recognize that that's based in your trauma, but that doesn't have to be in your present, right? And so like the normalizing of symptoms, the normalizing of not being able to feel sensations in their body, helping them, give them language and labeling, wrap it up. And so the psychoeducation, right, and the normalizing for folks is really, really important. And cultural humility, which meeting the person, right, we talked about the treating the whole person and where they come from and who they are and the pieces of their backgrounds is part of treating the whole person. And that might also include pieces of historical trauma and cultural trauma that are specific to their cultural background. And so knowing about that, being able to help them label that and understand it's really important. Thank you so much.
So, in the effort of time, this clock is a little bit fast, so we have a little bit more time than it appears. Thank you all so much. Super informative. You fit together beautifully, and I think it was really, it just made sense. And so thank you guys for the information that you've already given us. I have took a couple notes. I don't want to spend too much time on me because I'm wondering if there could be some questions and conversations. But I do think just being mindful of the audience and knowing there's a lot of students and a lot of newer clinicians and some seasoned clinicians, but we're all learners. The two things I think that I find to be tricky to navigate with trauma, primarily that you all have touched upon already, not to bring anything new in, are the ideas of flooding, because I know sometimes we get very eager as clinicians, particularly newer clinicians, where we're like, oh my God, they want to do the work. I'm taking it there because I'm going to heal them, right? And so I think perhaps talking a little bit more about flooding and what that does and how we can be mindful in our practice around that. And then also there was a mention of the emotion of shame coming up, which is huge. And I think a lot of us as clinicians and humans can wrap our minds around depression and anxiety a little bit differently than we wrap our minds around working with shame particularly. I think it's very loaded and very layered. And so I'm wondering if from the audience, those two things might be a little helpful for the panelists to kind of popcorn around and expand upon a little bit or share. I'm seeing a couple head nods, so we'll go with that and then we'll open it up for just a dialogue together or questions, if that sounds okay for everybody. Okay. So I'll leave it to you all to, let's perhaps start with the idea of flooding. And if I say flooding, is that something that is understood by most, or do we want a little bit more clarity around that word?
Clarity.
Okay. Does anybody want to start with that up there?
I feel like it ties into what you were talking about in terms of the limbic system and emotions and having difficulty regulating it in sessions. I think what I was trying to describe is this very sequential piece that's constantly in place and structure in sessions.
Can you just speak a little about what flooding is to clarify for people?
So that there are experiences that make it hard, or a trigger or an event that make it hard for the person to stay connected in the here and now. So there's an emotional reaction that happens, and the body is full of itself and full of that emotion, incapable of hearing conversation and reality oriented sort of, you need to do this or you need to do that. It is just in the emotion, but it is at the same time too much to hold. So it is a very uncomfortable place to be.
And also this idea that the emotional reaction is overwhelming for our internal resources, and I just add that piece because like our resources look different from person to person, and so there's not this universal like, yep, you hit a 5 and you're flooded, right? It's like it's going to look different for each person because your internal and external resources and that combination is different for all of us, and so the point at which that the emotional content would actually overwhelm our internal and external resources is different for each person. But it's that your body can no longer hold, right? And so it overwhelms our system, both the limbic system, right? And there's a neurological and physiological response.
And at that time, the patient or client might still want to continue the work.
Yes, right.
They're very much like full speed ahead in that moment for some people, and they're no longer able to tolerate it, and it becomes actually detrimental to the work for some people. It becomes harmful to work with people when they're in that state.
Many years ago, a professor described it in flooding, right? You can't keep your head above water in that moment. Your eyes, you may still be there, but your nose, you can't breathe. I mean, and that you can maybe, but it's different for every person, as we were speaking of. But it's when literally the floodgates have opened and you can no longer sustain standing on solid ground.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I've just also had an extremely trauma-informed therapist working with me as a client and expressing concern about, in your setting, for example, which was mine, which was a 50-minute session, and then I'm going to go back out in the world. And I was doing EMDR, which is a trauma processing technique. And she was saying, I want to make sure before we open the gates of all of the stuff that may come up when you're working with this trauma, that you have the resources to then deal with that when you go out in the world. So in other words, a client like myself in that situation may be like, let's do it,
Right.
which I absolutely was.
Right.
And she said, that's great that you want to do that, but we have to take care. It's up to the clinician to maybe be more cautious about it. In other words, it's not necessarily just that you wouldn't be able to handle the flooding in that moment, but that it might then cause a little bit of an avalanche when you go out into reality and have to function.
Yeah, and one of the things that I appreciate about the EMDR work is that, it's quite manualized. There's a whole phase called resourcing, right? That before you can engage in the manualized, right, and scripted modality, you have to have done the resourcing phase with people. And so that's something that I've definitely borrowed from the EMDR work, because so much of the resourcing interventions are body-based, right? And so when I was going through the EMDR training, I'm thinking like, this isn't new. Wait a second, this is DMT stuff, but there's a ton of overlap there. And so it's the resourcing in my office, right? I'm not going to start doing trauma-related work until I have a great, what does your support network outside of here look like? Where do you go when you leave my session? Are you going home? Are you going back to your office? Are you driving? Are you, do you have a break? Are you picking your kid up from school in 5 minutes and have to really shift gears? And so what does your support network, both kind of immediately surrounding the session, but also there's these layers, right? And part of that layering also has to be the resourcing in the body. Do you know how to self-calm? Do you know how to self-soothe? Do you know how to ground? And that stuff I teach in my office with folks, and we practice it before we would do any deeper dive into the work, right? Do you know how to ground here in the office with me? Can you do it on your own? Have you practiced it at home? How's it going when you practice that at home? When you get overwhelmed at home, what's it like when you sit and you do the same thing that we've done in here? Has that been successful? If not, let's figure out why. That has to happen first, right? And so I think that's those things can help avoid or prevent flooding potentially. Great.
You can also say that those things can be helpful in the moment of flooding as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have a student that I've worked with for about maybe 3 years now who's transitioning from male to, a student that I've worked with for 3 years now who's transitioning from male to female and is constantly misgendered in the school and reaches the point of I'm jumping over this desk and I'm now attacking this person because I'm sick of the misgendering. And Miss Hunter, so-and-so needs you, come get the student. And the rationality, the cognition isn't there. There's no, it's just, let's let this out, let's ground, let's work on all these strategies that we put in place in this moment to try to help bring some of the floodgates, help drain the pool a little bit. Yeah.
And I think that in any sort of session, maybe not the crisis intervention, but even in the crisis intervention, that's where ritual is really important. And having that opening of your session, but also having that closing of your session. And it can be, for me, that looks like with some kids, we have a secret handshake we do at the end of every session. But for some kids, that's just cleaning up the room, putting everything away, and just transitioning out of this therapeutic space back to the real world. It's so important.
And I can say also we touched a little bit on vicarious trauma and self-care, having a ritual for yourself too. At the end of the day, I have a movement ritual that I do in my office before I leave. And the days that I forget to do it, it comes with me. Sometimes I've even left the building and been like, oh, I forgot to do it. And I walk back up to my office and I put down my bags and I take off my coat and I do it again. So having those beginning and ending rituals for ourselves too.
It changes for you. It changes. I know for me, 7 years ago when I started in the field and I was a single person, just focused on this. It's different as I moved into someone who's married, who has a family, who you have to keep checking in on that for yourself as well, because the vicarious trauma it's real and it can be difficult to navigate.
So maybe we'll take this question, and then I do want to be aware of time and respect those of you that have to go and those of you that are on the panel and how much time you've committed to us, and then make some time for evals and stuff. But go ahead.
Thank you. This is probably more for Anne and Margrethe, or just people are going in groups. So if you have someone that maybe starts flooding in the middle of a group session, how do you address that?
So I think that, I need to know the specifics of that person's presentation, because it could be that, I would need to meet the movement where it would help channel the flooding. So the very important piece, I think what Amy was saying too, is to join the person, but to note if that is threatening to the person or not, so that you would need to assess whether you're on the sidelines or whether you're, from a distance, or, you have to ask questions if that's helpful, or without talking too much, because you want to position yourself and then see if the response is helpful, but to then just be within ground, and then the graduality of improving sort of their rate of breathing, their rate of behaving erratically, so that you could sort of slow it down. Meeting them there, I think, is really helpful. It could be that they're in the middle of using the prop, and so you also have the tools of sort of slowing down the prop. So any way that you could channel is helpful. The feet on the floor, obviously, is helpful in terms of that. But it also could be that you have to see if it's a real crisis or if it's someone who is becoming more flooded, because it could also be that the whole group could help organize, that you could have a rhythmic sort of movement where it's not just focusing on you, Heather, but it is, the whole group that's sort of helping to slow down the movement itself, that they could be able to tolerate that is not necessarily sort of like, and now, Heather, slow down. That is very helpful.
And seeing if it's something about the structure of the group that may be triggering and changing the structure a little bit, or bringing in more structure, or more SM. Is it because it doesn't feel safe in here? Is that why this is happening? How can I help make this feel more safe?
And not necessarily take the blame on yourself too, because there are so many factors in groups that could flood someone. You could hear someone else's story, and all of a sudden, don't beat yourself up too much in the moment for saying like, "Whoa, that person got pushed too far." Be present and be there for them.
And the focusing of the here and now, and so that there's also labeling things perhaps in the room, or labeling things that kind of help bring that person back.
So I'm going to pause this here. I want to thank our panelists. You all were amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. A couple quick announcements. If you are getting continuing education credits, please fill out an evaluation. Once your evaluation is completed, you will get your certificate. We're going to take about 5 minutes or so. We're going to set up some snacks. If you'd like to stay and join us and just kind of talk and hang out and network and meet each other and continue conversations, please do. And thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.